Good evening, ASD parents. I am Carol Boatman, Director of Learning Innovations. I oversee the ASD virtual program K-12. Specifically, we will be talking about Calvert Learning, which is for K-5. So we're excited to have you here. You do have the opportunity to ask questions, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. We'll either answer them live or we will answer them written. I do have two specialists from Calvert Learning, Jennifer Blevins and Misty Jacobs. And Jennifer will be giving us an overview of Calvert Learning, focusing on the role of the parent, specifically with the learning guide, but then also stopping to answer questions and maybe even giving a little overview of the student too, Jennifer, just given some of that background. And then Misty and I will also just interject with some live questions, and then the team members from ASD Virtual will answer questions also. So I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer. If you wanted to go ahead and get started, Jennifer, and give some overview, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and give you a quick agenda of what we'll be covering this evening. As Carol mentioned, we will begin with kind of some general overview type information, just so that you are familiar with the courses, how they're structured, as well as a little bit of the why behind some of the different assignments that your students will be doing throughout the rest of the school year through the virtual program. We'll also talk a lot about what your role is as the at-home learning guide and how you can support your student well as he or she is working through the program here. And then we're going to actually get into the platform, and we're going to show you how to get logged in, take a look at what everything looks like from the student perspective, as well as what your role looks like in the platform. And then hopefully we'll be able to answer questions along the way, as well as have some time at the end to open things up for some Q&A. So to begin, I want to give you an idea of how we have built all of this content. We have a framework that we use for each and every subject area in all of the grade levels K through 5 for the 4 core subject areas of math, science, English language arts, and social studies. Right now, your students will be doing, in terms of their core curriculum, definitely the math and the English language arts, and you'll be focused more on social studies for the second half of the year. But all of the courses follow this PLUS framework. And the P in our PLUS framework stands for projects. You'll find that from time to time, your students will be working on projects throughout the course of a unit. And your teachers will be supporting your students in terms of giving some tips on how to complete these projects. And sometimes your teachers might make the projects optional. But one of the reasons why we really do believe that project-based learning is a great way to encourage students to stay involved with online learning is because it gives them a hands-on way to really interact with the materials and the content that they're learning. The projects help build real-world applicability, and they're also this really great thread that kind of goes throughout the course of a unit of study. Students will be introduced to the project at the start of the unit, and then they'll work on that project as they go throughout the unit and learn new material. And speaking of learn, the L in our PLUS framework stands for learn. And these components of the framework really do focus in on trying to provide different learning opportunities. So it's never going to be a talking head video or just a whole bunch of text on the screen. Students will be interacting with different resources in the learn component of our framework. Sometimes students might be working with a digital text. Other times they might actually be walking away from the computer and doing a hands-on activity. They may be working with virtual manipulatives in math. But we really want to make sure within the learn component of our framework that students are actively engaged in the learning process. The U in our PLUS framework stands for use. And this is where your students are going to start to earn their score, earn their grade in the platform. The Use for Mastery assessments are designed to be more open-ended for students. And so when you get to a Use for Mastery assessment, you might see that we're asking students to kind of think outside of the box, because what these Use for Mastery assessments are designed to do is really measure the transferability of skills. So your student may have been learning about story elements in English language arts. And so for the story that your student was working on, you know, because you've worked with them through the lessons, that they can identify the characters and the main plot events and the setting and give some key details. But until you ask your student to really transfer that understanding to a different text, you don't really know if they've mastered it yet. And so that's really what these Use for Mastery assessments are designed to do. And then finally, the S in our PLUS framework stands for show. And you'll notice that the S and the P, they're the same color. And that's because these two lesson components actually go hand in hand with one another. The S stands for show, and these are chances for students to show off what they've been learning by putting work into their projects. And so the show lessons will be times for students to work on those projects throughout the course of the unit. And then at the end of the unit of study, they get a final show opportunity that allows them that chance to show off that final project, which really builds a sense of pride and ownership in their work. So the next couple of slides are just going to be some examples of this PLUS framework in action. Here are a couple of projects that you might find within the curriculum. Some things that I want to make note of in terms of the projects. First of all, if you need any resources for the projects, we're always going to focus in on things that you already have at home. So we're not asking you to go out and buy tons of materials or anything like that. We actually are going to focus in on items that you have around your home. Also, you're going to have some resources whenever a project is introduced that are specifically designed for you as the parent or learning guide. And these are going to give you some tips on how to support your student through the project. And then finally, I think it's really important to know that just because a project is written a certain way, that doesn't mean that your student has to do it that way to the letter. If there's ever a time when you're looking at a project and you feel like perhaps the way the project is written or the materials needed are going to be something that your student can't do, reaching out to your student's teacher and letting them know that gives you an opportunity to work with the teacher to find a better way for your student to complete the project if needed. And here's an example of the L in our framework, a learn component. So you'll notice that in this particular lesson, students are going to be watching a little video clip to go along with the content that they're learning. With every single learn component lesson, there's always going to be some sort of submission, whether it's a rate your understanding question or a math practice question. These types of questions don't count towards your student's grade. They're just meant to be times and opportunities for your students to stop and think about and evaluate what they've learned so far in a lesson. But you'll also have some opportunities within the learn component of the framework for some graded activities. We call these graded activities quick checks, and typically they will be auto scored and your student will get immediate feedback. So as soon as your student submits an answer for a quick check, the score will pop up there. It does count towards the student's grade. So as you're getting started here and in the platform, it is good to just make sure that your student knows to double check those responses before clicking submit, maybe even calling you in and letting you have the opportunity to kind of take a final look at it before students click submit here at the beginning, just to be sure that they're answering all of the question parts and things like that for these quick checks, because they do count towards your student's final grade. And here's an example of one of those Use for Mastery assessments that I mentioned. Again, you'll notice that they are always going to be open-ended responses. And so your students do have the option of typing in a response. You can also upload a file. So if you have a younger student in particular, maybe grade K, 1 or 2, and if they're anything like my second grader at home, the typing skills aren't quite there yet. And it would probably be much easier for them to handwrite a response rather than try to type in a paragraph or something like that. And so this file upload option gives you that opportunity for your student to handwrite their submission or even draw a picture if they're in kindergarten or first grade. And then you can snap a picture of that handwritten work and upload it as a file for these Use for Mastery assessments. Sometimes you'll also see, especially teachers, encourage students to maybe try other ways to submit their responses. You do have the option of submitting a voice recording if you want to use speakpipe.com, or I've seen lots of families use Google Drive just to record their student and then putting in a link to the Google Drive so that the teacher can listen to the student's response if typing or handwriting is going to be a challenge. But there are other times when your teacher might reach out and say, you know what, for this particular Use for Mastery assessment, I'm going to have the class write a bulleted list instead of a paragraph, or submit a graphic organizer like a web instead of writing a paragraph. And so sometimes your teachers will reach out to you with other ways, alternative ways to submit these Use for Mastery assessments. And then finally, in our PLUS framework here, this is an example of a show lesson. So this, again, is a time for students to stop and work on that project as they go throughout the unit. And so you'll see here, this is where they're going to start making progress on that final project. There will almost always be a rate your progress question associated with these interim show opportunities. And they really are a chance, again, to help your student kind of self-assess where they are and if they're making progress on these projects. But then there are also opportunities for your student's teacher just to stay in the loop and make sure that your student is on the right track. And then this right here is an example of one of those final show opportunities where, again, your student will have the option of uploading a file or typing in a response, or you could put a link here too. If you've created maybe a Google slide presentation, you can put that link here as well. And so just like the Use for Mastery assessments, you do have multiple ways to submit your final project. And just as a quick little note, all of the projects are going to be worth 20 points each, and they will be teacher scored. In terms of the course structure, every course is really structured and designed in the exact same way. So not only are they going to follow that PLUS framework that we just finished talking about, but they're also always going to be kind of broken down into the same parts. So every course is broken down into units. Some of these units will have a project. All of the units will have a unit quiz at the very end. And so that will be the final assignment or assessment that students submit at the end of a unit of study. Within the units themselves, you'll have lessons that are broken down into lesson parts. At the end of every full lesson, there'll be that Use for Mastery assessment. And then within the lesson parts, your students will be answering questions like a quick check or stopping and evaluating their progress by answering Rate Your Understanding type questions. And we'll take a deeper look at this course structure when we get logged into the platform in just a second. But before we do that, I do want to talk a little bit about what your role is in supporting your student through this virtual learning platform. First of all, the teachers at ASD are wonderful. They are incredibly supportive, and they're going to be there for you every step of the way. So I don't want to water down what their role is. However, they're not going to be, on the phone with your student all day, every day, making sure that they're doing their work. They're going to be there to grade your student work, provide extra support. They will also do recorded lessons and things like that. But in terms of making sure that your student gets logged in every day, making sure that there's someone there that can help kind of answer some questions that they may have, that role really kind of falls to you as a member of the student's family. And so we call that family role a learning guide role. And you have a very specific login that has really great features to help support you in the role of the learning guide for your student. But mainly what you'll want to make sure that you're doing is making sure that your student is getting logged in each and every day. We encourage students to only do one lesson part per day in each of the 4 core subject areas. So you don't really want your student to go in and do 20 lessons in one day, because it probably means that they're rushing through the content a little bit. So you really do want to focus in on making sure that your student isn't rushing and skipping ahead. You'll also want to make sure that anytime your student is working on an assessment, that you're there to help get them logged in, but that work is truly their own and it's authentic. And then the biggest role for you as a learning guide for your student is to be kind of that support person when your student needs to communicate with your teacher, or if you have any questions, kind of being that advocate for your student as they're working through the virtual platform. And then obviously I do want to talk a little bit about the student role this evening as well. It's very important for your student to log in regularly. So each and every school day, I know that the school day does look a little differently when you're working remotely, but it is good to kind of set a daily schedule so that your student is logging in every single day during the school week. And typically your students are going to spend about 4 to 6 hours in the platform, just like they would spend in a regular school day. And so you'll want to make sure that your student realizes that this, just because they're working from home doesn't mean that it's a vacation, that they do have work that they need to complete each and every day. And when we jump into the platform, I'm actually going to highlight how your student will know what to do each and every day when he or she logs in, because it's actually formatted very nicely for them so that it's almost like a checklist. They can jump right in, click on the lessons, and get started. But it will be very important for them to know how to get logged in, as well as know how to access the lessons, and then most importantly, know how to reach out to their teacher if they have any questions. And just before we jump into the platform, I do want to highlight a couple of things that are really critical for your success as that learning guide role. Every single course has built-in teaching notes that are right at point of use. So when your student's working on a lesson, let's say the lesson is called Numbers to 10 Part 1, right within your version of the lesson, you'll have teaching notes that are meant to help support your student by giving you some background information. In this case, the teaching notes are going to have a little video for you to watch so that you know how to support your student with this particular concept. Sometimes the teaching notes will have ideas on ways that you can kind of scaffold the learning a little bit more for your student. So if your student doesn't really understand the concept the way it's written in the lesson, the teaching notes might give you some other ideas to address the particular topic. Other times in the teaching notes, you're going to find the answers to the daily work, especially in math. And so taking a look at those teaching notes are going to be a really great support for you as you're there supporting your student. We also have a really great parent getting started page, and I'll show you how to get to that when we get logged into the platform. But this getting started page has lots of great resources, not just for you, but also for your student in terms of, how do you get set up, and what are some ways that you can really kind of set your learning environment up for success, or I'm having trouble with, accessing the digital textbooks. Where do I go? Well, the parent resources page actually has some really great videos on how to use the platform well. And so we'll take a look at that together, but this is a tremendous resource that is available to you as well as your student as you're getting started. And then also, we do have a technical support team that's available to you. I believe that you most commonly will be reaching out to the ASD team, but if there's ever a need to kind of reach out directly to us, we are there for you as well, just to make sure that you have everything that you need to have in order to have a successful rest of your school year. And so now we're going to jump on into the platform. I think this is a good time just to pause to see if there are any questions so far while I get switched over to the learning platform here.
I don't see any, Jennifer, that have been listed, but if you guys have a question, go ahead and chat that in and we can answer it live or type in the answer.
Thanks, Misty. I appreciate that. This is probably where we'll have most of the questions. So when it's time for you to get logged in, or when it's time for your students to get logged in, and I do believe that you may have already gotten started earlier this week, but just as a refresher, in case you haven't, you should receive an email with your username and password to get into the platform. Your student will have login credentials, and you as the learning guide will have login credentials. To get logged in, you will click on, you'll go to edm.geniussis.com and enter your username and password, and then click on sign in. And this is what you'll see when you first get logged in. I'm actually logged in as a student right now, and I will switch over to the parent login in just a moment. But the student login and the parent login actually look identical to one another. And so when you're logged in, if you're ever wondering, who's logged in right now, your name will always, the name of the person logged in will always show up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. So Calvert Jr. is my student. I like to consider him a high achiever because he is enrolled in 37 courses. Your student will only be enrolled in let's see, 5 to 6 courses, but the student obviously has a lot on his plate. And then down here, you'll see little tiles for each and every subject area. You only have to click launch once to get into the learning platform where the lessons are held. And so I like to consider this initial platform, the pink platform, is kind of like the front door of your school building. And then the actual learning is going to take place in the classroom. And so I consider this blue page kind of like your classroom. Once you're launched into the blue Calvert platform page, it's pretty easy for your students to know where to get started. Now, right now, I know that it might be a little bit up in the air in terms of what exactly day your students are going to be starting on. Teachers have been working to skip students ahead as they see fit. But ideally, your students will be on a day in the platform. And you'll see right here for this student, Cal, he is on day 5. And these are links that are going to take Cal into lessons themselves. So you'll see right here, he has a lesson in social studies that he needs to complete. The rest of the lessons for this day have been completed. You can tell that by this little green completed bar. So as a student, I'm going to jump in to the lesson itself and go ahead and work through the content. A few things that I'd like to point out about an individual lesson. First of all, you can have this content read aloud to your student, especially if you have a younger student that might not be reading independently yet. You can have them jump in, press play, and the lesson is truly written to the student. And so they can come in here and have this read aloud to them. We can also translate this content into Spanish, Chinese, or Arabic if that would help. And then as your student goes through the different learn cards in this particular lesson, your student will have a link to the particular textbook that's being used for this subject area. So this is a link to the social studies text. And then at the end of the lesson, so after the student has done all of the different components that are being asked of in this particular lesson, the student will do the quick check here at the end, click submit, and then it looks like we have a couple of additional activities to kind of extend the learning here. So there's a little brain pop video, a little brain pop movie here. All of these resources should work on any device, whether it's a Chromebook or a laptop or even an iPad. We do recommend, if you're going to use an iPad, that you use the Safari browser, not Chrome. There are some resources that only work in Safari. We would also want you to make sure that you are running the most up-to-date version of the Apple iOS. And so once the student has completed all of these activities, submitted that quick check, I'll go ahead and just answer the question here. You'll see that I get immediate feedback. So I find out that the answer that I selected, which was this one, is wrong. And the right answer is imaginary lines on a globe or map and a grid on a map or globe. I needed to select 2 answers. And then down here, you'll see that I get a little bit of extra information about why the right answer is right, why the wrong answers are wrong. And then I'm even encouraged to complete the More to Explore activity to help me revisit what the lesson was about. But you'll see now that I've completed that lesson, I can come back over here to my daily schedule page, and it's actually moved on to day 6 because now I've completed all of the lessons that were assigned for me for day 5. Also, when you're logged in as a student, you do have up-to-date real-time information on how well you're doing in each of your courses. So this student has mostly 5th grade courses. I do have a couple of 4th grade courses and a grade 1 course here. But I can see all of the scores in each of my courses over here. If I want to get some more details, so let's say I want to see why I have a 67% in social studies, that's pretty low. Maybe I want to dig in a little bit deeper there. You can click on this little arrow on the right-hand side of the page. And it's going to give you a list of all of the items that the student has submitted for grading. Anything that's in bold counts towards the student's grade. So you'll see a quick check, a use for mastery, and a unit quiz here. And this right here indicates the score. These 2 submissions haven't been graded yet. And so I can dig in deeper too and take a look at anything that I have submitted as well. So let's take a look here at, let's see if I've got, so here's a use for mastery assessment that was graded by my teacher. So I can come in here, take a look at my submission, see if there's any feedback that I received from the teacher. You would find that right on the quiz or use for mastery assessment itself. You can also come in on this dashboard and take a look at your student's progress. This will tell you how far along your student is in each of the subject areas, kind of give you a percentage of completion here. And then the attendance tab is going to track each day that your student logs in and works in the platform. So anytime your student gets logged in, that day will show up with an underline. And if you click on the day, you can see what the student worked on that day. So on January 21st, my little friend Cal here did 2 social studies lessons, and that was it. So this would be an opportunity for me as the parent to say, hey, Cal, I'm really glad that you got in and that you worked on your social studies on Thursday last week, but we really want to make sure that you're doing 1 lesson per day in each subject area. So let's make sure next time we do a math lesson and an English language arts lesson as well. One last thing that I do want to point out about the student login is that anytime work is graded by your student's teacher, or if your student's teacher has determined that they'd like your student to try again on a particular assessment, you and your student will always get a notification up here in the kind of upper right-hand area of the screen. When you click on that little bell, it's going to open up your notifications page and let you know what happened. So in this case, the student was granted a retake for a unit quiz. And so you can click here to retake the assessment. You can also click on these little 3 dots to see if you have any feedback from your teacher. So in this case, my teacher said, good effort, but I'd like for you to try again. I can click here and give that assessment another try. And now I'm going to jump out of the student platform and log in as a parent, because I do want to highlight those teaching notes for you. And so now I am logged in as Callie Calvert, who is Cal's guardian. And so again, to know who you're logged in as, your name is always going to be in the upper right-hand corner. This particular parent actually has multiple students in the program, in the platform. And so if I click on this down arrow right here, I'll see my 3 students. I'm going to stick with Cal. So I'm going to go here, and this is going to give me the exact same view that Cal had on his initial login page. Just like for the student platform, I click on launch, and it's going to take me into the blue. And this is really where you're going to spend most of your time, whether you're a parent or a student. I'm going to select Cal to make sure that the work that we're looking at is his work, since we were just logged in as him as a student. And you'll notice again, same look and feel, everything looks identical. But the one thing that I do want to point out that is different is the fact that you as the parent or learning guide have access to those teaching notes. So I'm going to go in through the class view here. Students can get in this same way as well. We will take a look at grade 1 English Language Arts. And so here as a parent, I can get a high level look at the entire grade 1 ELA course. For your students, they're probably just going to be, working on these last 3 units, since this is about the midway point of the course. And so maybe I'm going to take a look at Unit 4 and see what the different lessons are that my student will be doing. I can get a look ahead and see, when are they going to do their first Use for Mastery assessment? Okay, well, it's going to be at the end of this first lesson called Meet the Characters of Arbor Day Square. It's broken down into 4 lesson parts. They're going to do that Use for Mastery at the end. Maybe I even want to take a look ahead and see, what is this Use for Mastery assessment asking my student to do? Okay, well, this looks like it's a little bit more of a multiple choice question instead of more of an open-ended type question. But as the learning guide, I can come in and be in preview mode and kind of preview the questions. You'll notice that I am not able to submit because I am logged in as a parent, but I can get a look at the different questions that will be asked on this Use for Mastery assessment. Here are those teaching notes that I mentioned. So this is a really great example of a teaching note, because not only is it kind of giving you some background information about, it's a great idea to create these index cards with these high frequency words, and you can play a little game with them. So these are just teaching tips that are designed to help support you as you're working with your student in their courses. This is what the English Language Arts text looks like, just since we're here. It will, all of the resources that you click on, whether it's a Brain Pop video or a textbook, they're always going to open up in a new tab. So it is important to make sure that you have the pop-up blocker turned off for the Calvert site, so that those new tabs will open up directly for you. This particular resource, the Pearson texts, if you are accessing these materials through an iPad, you'll definitely need to be in Safari when you go to access these resources, because they only work in the Safari browser. And let's take a look at another subject area here as well. We'll take a look at math really quickly. We'll look at a math lesson. And a few things to point out about a math lesson. Let me open a different one, actually. Okay, so every math lesson will start with a warm-up. Again, there are the answers for the questions in those teaching notes. You'll also find that we'll ask students to work on a workbook page, for example. These are static, and so students can't type on these or write on these unless you wanted to take a screenshot and then type or write on them. They are static. For your older students, you may want to have them just write their responses in a notebook. We do encourage in the Getting Started lessons for students to keep a notebook for each subject area just to be able to take notes. Or if you have a larger notebook that you just kind of separate into sections, have a little section for each subject area so your students can answer questions and take notes. But this is something else I also like to point out, just in terms of as you're getting started, you may have some questions about these workbook pages. Again, since I'm logged in as a parent, I'm in preview mode, so my score won't be recorded. And up here in the upper right-hand corner from the parent view, you'll also see that you can run some reports, which is different from the student view. One report that you may want to run somewhat regularly would be this performance and progress summary, which is kind of like a report card. So it's going to give you on one spreadsheet every course that your student is enrolled in and their current grade and how far along they are in each of those courses. So you have that there available to you, but you also have access to all of that information on the student's dashboard page as well. So you also, as the parent, have access to the performance, progress, and attendance tabs, just like the student. And finally, I do want to point out up here this little question mark icon. So I mentioned at when we were in our little PowerPoint presentation that we do have a really great Getting Started page that is really geared for you as a guardian. So you'll see here some resources that I like to point out that I think are really, really helpful. These little videos here on getting started as a learning guide and getting started as a Calvert student are great. A lot of what you'll find in those recordings we have covered today, so it might be a little bit of a review, but it wouldn't hurt to have your student go through and watch this one. Maybe you watch it with your student, just to make sure that all of those expectations are really clear for them. You also have a really great library of resources here. I mentioned the fact that you may want to, you may run into some tools, some online tools that are a little bit challenging to navigate. So for each subject area, there is a little video here. I really strongly encourage you to take a look at this social studies one. I have a little video tutorial on how to use the content on an iPad. I think we've talked a little bit about that this evening as well. And then down here, these are just some great general resources. So they're not necessarily Calvert specific, but they are really designed to help support you as you are supporting your student from home. So little things like, how do I build a daily schedule? Or, what are some ways that I can create a learning environment that's going to be really conducive to learning for my students? So these are great resources for you to check out as well on this Getting Started page. And so that's a quick tour. Again, to get to that Getting Started page, you can get to it from the learning guide role or the student role. You just click on that little question mark and then you get to the page right there. So I think I've seen a few additional questions come in. This is a great time to ask them, especially if you have had the chance to get logged in and maybe you were looking for certain things or you have specific questions about how the rest of your school year will go. I'm happy to start taking some of those questions now.
Thanks, Jennifer. So one question that came in that I think it's a really good one that everybody could benefit from. Can you talk a little bit about when you click from the dashboard on launch, it takes you to just one suggested daily schedule, correct? So there's some question on, do you have to click launch for each course to be able to get into each course? Can you talk a little bit about what to expect with that?
Great question. So you only have to click launch once. It's going to take you into the Calvert platform and you'll have all of the courses listed here. So, so you don't have a different daily schedule. So if I click on ELA, it's still going to take me to the same blue page, which it's not as obvious here since I'm logged in as a learning guide. But see, the view is exactly the same regardless of the subject area that I click on launch. That really truly, this page truly is just a gateway to get to the Calvert content. So regardless of the actual course that you click on, it's always going to take you to this blue platform where you're going to spend most of your time. I will say that depending on which course you launch, this right here, this is not an accurate representation of how much time students have spent on the platform. But like if you always click on the math, for example, the rest of your tabs here might say 0 minutes because you're always launching from here. But your teachers and ASD, they don't use this platform for any data. It really is just kind of that front office view. And this is where the magic happens. So this is where all of the students, where the students do all of their work, do all of their submissions. And this is also kind of the true north in terms of this is where you want to go. This platform, this page, this blue platform is where you want to go to see your current student grades as well as progress information.
Thank you for that. A couple more questions that came in. So if if a teacher does not require the project or show tasks, how do you skip ahead from those to the use for mastery or upcoming learn lessons? We are unable to skip project or show lessons, even though the teacher said to skip them.
And Carol, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you all have forced progression turned on? That feature? I can't remember.
I think we do have it turned on.
Okay, so in those instances, you would need to reach out to the teacher and let the teacher know that you are ready for that lesson to be skipped, and the teacher can actually skip the lesson on his or her side. The other option would be you could submit a blank submission, especially on the show lessons. You could just submit, typically those show lessons. Let me open one up here. Let's see. I think this one has a project.
Jennifer, it is forced progression. They do have to let the teacher know. The teacher does have to move them, does have to either go in and skip it for them if it's something that they don't want to do, particularly for projects, or they can submit a blank one.
Perfect. Thank you, Carol. Excellent. But just so you know that for these little, I call them interim shows. So they're just those times when students are going to work on the project as they go. These don't count towards a student's grade. So they can answer anything and submit it. Well, if they're logged in as the student. And then that would just unlock the next lesson. So submitting something here for that show lesson will unlock the next lesson so that your student can do it.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. We have another question that came in that says, can you please show an example of a typical second grader's work? This seems like an overwhelming amount of work. Is it generally the same amount of work for each grade? So maybe talk a little bit just about how, parents could definitely go through and maybe just focus on the material that they feel is most beneficial for their child.
Sure. So I don't think I have second grade loaded into this demo, but I do have first grade. And so an ELA is probably not the best example because ELA is a heavy subject area. When you're thinking about, how much time will your students spend on each individual subject area, English language arts is going to be the big rock, so to speak. That's where your students are going to spend most of their time each day. And I know one of the things that many of the teachers have been working on is providing some additional resources so that it's not so word heavy for some of the younger students. I know that teachers have created some video resources of phonics lessons and things like that to kind of cut down on like the reading portions and things like that. But this is what kind of a typical lesson would look like for the student. Again, they can come in and have this read aloud to them, Or ideally, especially for English language arts, they do have a learning guide that's working with them that can kind of help support them through this part of the lesson. But we're asking students kind of those general sorts of questions that a teacher in a classroom would be asking. So at this point, they've actually already read Stellaluna once, and so they're going to be rereading this book again and focusing on different story elements this time that they read the text. So we're going to have them stop and think about, you've already read this book. So can you tell me what happened at the beginning and what are some interesting words that you saw? And then we're going to have them take a look at the text. In this case, again, we're looking at this text called Stellaluna. All of the textbook resources can also be read aloud to students. I always like to come in here and do 2-page views. So that's kind of like I'm turning the pages of a book. And so you'll see here, I can come in, I can press play. So I can do this very independently as a student. I can come in, press play, and it's going to turn the pages for me and read it aloud to me, just like if I was looking at one of those interactive books on my iPad. And then we're going to talk about the story. And so these are some questions that the student will ask or will answer. Again, these don't have to be handwritten or anything like that. This is really kind of guiding a discussion with your student, and these are the kinds of things that would be happening in a classroom setting. All of these responses would be, or sample responses would be visible to you in your teaching notes. In this case, we are asking the students to write some answers in their journal. And then we're going to come into the next portion of our ELA lesson where we're going to do some vocabulary. So in this case, students are going to create a little vocabulary activity based on these 2 words. Oh, look, there's a teaching note there. We're going to have them produce some simple sentences, and then they're done. This is the end of the lesson where they rate their enthusiasm. So this is typical for an ELA lesson. The math lessons are going to take probably about 45 minutes each day. English language arts, I may have said this, is going to be about an hour and a half each day. And then social studies would probably only be about 30 minutes each day in terms of how much time your student will be working on each individual course.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Just one question I think that we can answer pretty quickly is about the ELA journal. Would you talk a little bit about whenever it makes reference to journals and lots of the different subject areas and what parents should do with that?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So we encourage students in the Getting Started lessons. We kind of cover this. I don't know if you were asked to do the Getting Started lessons, but if you haven't taken a look at them, the Welcome to Calvert lesson is the same for all subject areas, but each individual subject area has a specific Getting Started lesson for that course. And even if your teacher has already skipped your student ahead to the middle of the year, you can access these Getting Started lessons just by clicking on the course, coming to this kind of course overview page here, and you get to those Getting Started lessons like this. But the Getting Started lessons will encourage you to have a notebook or some type of resource for each individual subject area where your student can take notes, create graphic organizers, in math, write down answers to problems or use it as scratch paper. For math, we're going to call it a math notebook. For English language arts, we're going to call it an ELA journal. For science, I think we also call it a notebook. And for social studies, I don't know if we call it a notebook or a journal. Let's scroll down here and see. Let's see here. Here we go. Notebooks and journals. So we call it a journal in social studies. So great question.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. Another question. How much lesson planning time is average for parents to prepare for their first grader?
This is a really fantastic question, and I'm glad you're thinking about that, because I think that that's something that sometimes parents don't realize that they need to do. I would suggest, at the very least, taking a look at the English language arts and math lessons ahead of time. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to spend hours prepping, but making sure that you know ahead of time where the student learning is going for the day is important. So I would say probably 30 minutes each day, just to kind of get a preview. But I also know what it's like to have little children in your home all day, every day. And so sometimes that might not be able to happen each and every day. And so what I have seen work really well for many families, especially if you have multiple children that are working in the platform, is just taking some time, like on a Sunday evening or Sunday afternoon, while things are kind of calm, just taking a look at the week ahead and just making notes. It doesn't even necessarily have to be planning, but just kind of go in and, just make note if there are any extra resources, like, oh, we're going to need index cards for Wednesday's social studies lesson. Little things like that to kind of help you prepare so you're not caught off guard. But a lot of what you'll do in the lessons is really laid out for you pretty well. So it's almost like a script for you. And so the planning part has actually been done for you, but I think it's good to just be aware of what you're going to be doing before you actually sit down to do it, if that helps.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And Carol, it looks like that you would like to answer the next question about Zoom sessions.
I do.
All right. Awesome.
Go ahead.
The question is, our teacher offers Zoom sessions. Are these optional or mandatory? They were mandatory in our previous enrollment online, but switching over now, it seems that they are optional. Or they were mandatory in our previous enrollment online, but switching over now, it seems that they're optional.
Yeah, they are optional. Yeah, they are optional, but they are provided on a daily basis for ELA and math. We also are offering Suite 360, which is our social emotional learning curriculum that we launched a couple of weeks ago. That is one lesson a week, and staff, virtual teachers are either doing that during an ELA or math lesson, or they're offering it during either lunchtime or something to that effect. The Zoom sessions are optional, though. You're not required, but they are there to help if you get stuck on a lesson. They are going through the lessons, working through the pacing of the lessons, and helping provide guidance and stuff also.
All right. Thanks, Carol. And another question for you, Jennifer. Is it true that work for kindergartners will mainly be print and submit?
I think that that's probably the easiest way to approach it, if I'm honest, but it may also depend on the teacher and what their expectations are. I don't have any kindergarten loaded in here, but just like with the examples that we did look at, any of the quick checks that students submit, that's online and auto scored. Most of the Use for Mastery assessments are going to be more kind of clicking and submitting. All of the unit quizzes, that won't be print and submit. That being said, though, there are some components that you'll probably want to print, just so that your student has something to kind of write on. If it's a graphic organizer or a workbook page for math, for example, those are great to have printed out. And I believe that ASD actually has a packet of the printout resources so that you don't actually have to print it out yourself. And then in terms of that submission piece, I don't know if the kindergarten teachers at ASD are requiring those pieces to be submitted or not. But in general, everything can be submitted online on the online platform. And it's just kind of up to you in terms of how you want to submit it. So for those Use for Mastery assessments, as we mentioned, you can handwrite and then upload. But the unit quizzes and things like that, those are all going to be done and submitted online.
Thanks, Jennifer. So we're all caught up on our answers and our questions. If there's anything else, we still have a few more minutes. If you'd like to submit a question, we'd love to answer it live for you. One more just popped in. We're having trouble printing the kindergarten math workbook pages on the Chromebook. It prints them with the entire website. It doesn't give an option to save as a file. Are we missing something?
So I think it depends on which item you are trying to print, if it's a workbook page or a textbook page. So with the math, there is the math textbook and there is the math workbook. The math textbook pages can't be printed out. The math workbook pages should be printable because they are kind of like a PDF. And as I mentioned, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, or you may not be providing this for the mid-year enrollments, but I do believe that you all printed out those resources already for families.
We did. So they're available at your choice or neighborhood school. You just need to reach out to them and let them know that you would like the printed materials. And if they don't have any at the school because they've run out, they have the ability to order it, and then you would pick it up from your choice or neighborhood school.
So maybe that'll save you some time, hopefully.
Awesome. And another question, where are the projects and quizzes? On the calendar when you get to the specific day? Christine says she's still lost on this.
Okay, absolutely. So, first of all, there's not going to be a project for every single unit in every single course. So I just opened up this grade 4 social studies course, and I can see that these units 4, 5, and 6, these little icons here indicate that there is a project for these particular units. And so in this case, the very first lesson is going to be the introduction. So it's going to tell me what I'm going to be working on. This does not mean that I need to complete this project right on this day. This is truly just, hey, this is what you're going to be working on. And then if we come back here and take a look at the unit as a whole, these are times when the student will work on the project throughout the course of the unit, put the finishing touches on the project, and then submit it at the end of the unit. And then here's the unit quiz. So that unit quiz is going to happen at the end of the unit. All of these lessons, though, are planned out in your daily schedule. So when you get to that unit quiz, it's going to say here, unit quiz. Let's see if I can find one really fast. Here's one. So this is a unit quiz in geography. So it's going to be kind of outlined on your student's daily schedule. So when your student gets to that day, that's the assignment for the day. One of the reasons why it is good to kind of like plan ahead and take a look at this course outline view so that you can get an idea of when those events will occur, so that you can kind of get a little bit prepared. You'll also see too, if we're looking at this daily schedule, I can see on day 16, when I get to day 16, that I have a unit quiz coming up in social studies. And so this is a way for me to also know that I've got a quiz coming up in the next couple of days.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. And Carol, we'll pass it to you for our final words.
Excellent. So I want to thank everybody for being here, particularly Jennifer and Misty for taking the time to do the overview for Calvert Learning. I certainly know that each time I'm in here, I learn a little bit more and look at it a little bit differently. And I certainly appreciate all the families who took an opportunity to be here. We hope we answered all of your questions. We'll stay on for just a couple minutes, our team will, just to answer any following questions, and then we are going to close it up. This will be posted on our ASD virtual website, so if you wanted to go back and view it again, you certainly would have the option. And I'm going to piggyback on Jennifer Blevins' piece about the Getting Started webpage that they have for Calvert Learning. It really is informative and has lots of great information in there, and they continually update that. So I can tell you from when we first started in fall to where we are now, they've added things that I didn't even know that they added. So I want to say kudos to Misty and Jennifer and the Calvert Learning team to continue to upgrade those and and meet the needs of families.
Absolutely.
Hey, Christine, I missed your question. I'm not sure which one it is. So if you could type it in there again, I'll see if I can get it answered for you. And then for Tristan, hey, there is learning packets that do go with Calvert. You don't have to have them, but they're just a supplement, and you certainly are welcome to contact your school. They will have those available for you.